Well, the first thing they would have seen was a 1.5 kilometre wide ball of iron, probably with a vapour trail, which would show the glow of fire around the iron as it approached. They may have seen it for 2 or 3 days beforehand. Probably their shaman would say, this is the wrath of an angry god coming to punish somebody. And then they would see this streak, fireball, coursing through the sky. Even if the impact was over the horizon, it would have been a devastating time. DNA does indicate that a few people survived. The only way they could survive was by hiding in a cave. But what would happen when the firestorm blew out and they emerged? They would see utter desolation, black soot, nothing else. What could they eat? There might be a little bit of roast meat around, but it would be rather overdone. Hello, welcome to the 5th episode of the Quintology Files. Today we're still on the Younger Dryas, and we're going to look at what humanity experienced. In previous episode, we focused on the Dryas periods, the relatively recent past from around 17,000 BC to 9,600 BC, which saw our planet go through a tumultuous succession of dramatic climatic changes. Global average temperatures rose and fell much more suddenly and by much greater amounts than we're experiencing now through our efforts to pump out greenhouse gases. I speculated that most of these dramatic changes in climate were actually caused by meteor impacts. We've not yet found and dated more than one impact crater that can be tied into this series of events, but I think many people are looking.
Do you know the Gaia theory that the Earth could be self-adjusting?
Personally, I think it's unlikely for 2 reasons. Firstly, I don't think the Gaia theory implies that Earth is some kind of self-aware organism. I don't see any evidence for that. I think it's a completely inordinate, non-living entity. It would be nice if the planet could do that, and there are some self-adjusting factors that could be at work, but I don't think it's driven by any intellect. On the other hand, if the planet is nudging the climate back towards where it would prefer to be, this is only a very recent phenomenon. We have had very severe extremes in the past. We've had what are called snowball Earth periods that have lasted not for 10,000 years, but for 10 million years, or even up to 300 million years. So if Gaia was a self-aware entity, it was awfully slow to react. Admittedly, some of those periods were a long time ago, 2 or 3 billion years back. But no, to be blunt, I don't think that is something that we could rely upon to help us.
So how did this affect human society?
Right, if we use the example of the Hiawatha impact about 12,000 years ago, before the impact, North America was divided into roughly sort of 2 areas. Modern Canada, which was covered in ice, as the Laurentian ice cap. It was only just starting to retreat from the last ice age maxima, whereas the entire continental US appeared to be covered in forest. The human culture at that time, which is believed to have originated in Asia and trekked across a frozen Bering Strait into Alaska and then filtered down into continental US, covered the entire continent, living a modest hunter-gatherer society. It's referred to as the Clovis culture. This is because of the very intricate arrow tips that they carved from ivory tusks. Hence, we know they lived amongst megafauna that carried or grew large tusks. Evidence sampled from below the black mat, that's the 1 centimetre thick layer of pure carbon covering the continental US, 12,000 years down in the strata. This shows not only the incinerated forest cover, but we find the remains of megafauna. About 35 genera of large animals have been found, including mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, giant sloths, lions, camelopes, glyptodonts, elephant-like creatures, and giant beavers. But in common, they all went extinct overnight, as did the Clovis culture. There were no Clovis settlements found afterwards. All of the references to both the megafauna and the Clovis culture lay beneath the black mat, nothing above. One thing is clear, any survivors of the Clovis did not need to make, or they couldn't make these spear tips because there were no megafauna left, and they didn't need them because there wasn't any to kill. The human population of North America, the Clovis people, were thought to have completely disappeared, but DNA analysis indicates that most Native American tribes today do have markers indicating that they are descendants of the Clovis people. So some people did survive. The only large animals native to North America now are the bison and the related buffalo. And it's believed that some of these survived mainly in Alaska, right in the sort of northwest part of the continent. So they were less affected by the devastation caused by Hiawatha. Of course, once the forests had all been incinerated, when vegetation did grow back, the large areas of grasslands, which were perfect for the buffalo to breed with no predator around anymore, at least until the Europeans arrived. They unfortunately abused their position.
What was it like for the humans experiencing this impact?
Well, the first thing they would have seen was a 1.5 kilometre wide ball of iron, probably with a vapour trail, which would show the glow of fire around the iron as it approached. They may have seen it for 2 or 3 days beforehand. Probably their shaman would say, this is the wrath of an angry god coming to punish somebody. And then they would see this streak, fireball, coursing through the sky. Whether it was day or night, it would look amazing. Even if the impact was over the horizon, it would have been a devastating time. So to understand the scale of this impact, let's compare it with a few other explosions in terms of TNT megatons. The first nuclear bomb, Hiroshima, in 1945, released 0.15 megatons of TNT equivalent. The Tunguska airburst meteor in Siberia in 1908 is estimated at about 10 megatons. The Hiawatha impact is estimated at 700 megatons. Now, the interesting thing is, when the impact or the airburst explosion occurred in Siberia, the pressure wave of the impact was sufficient to knock people to the ground 500 kilometers away. So imagine what might have happened when the Hiawatha impact occurred. The very first effect would be the pressure wave. That would come at probably 10 kilometers a second, and given the relative scale, it could have knocked over every human being in the entire eastern half of the US. So everyone gets knocked over. They're picking themselves up, saying to each other, "What was that?" Then they hear the noise of the explosion. Tunguska, 6,000 kilometres from London. That airburst explosion was heard in London. Hiawatha to New York is a little under 3,000 kilometres. It's 70 times bigger. Even LA is 9,000 kilometres away. Given the scale, I think it is likely that the noise of the Hiawatha impact was actually heard completely around the world. So those are the first two things that happen. So you pick yourself up and you're checking whether your eardrums have been punctured. Then the next stage, you start to see the ejector. The impact temperature is estimated at around 3,000 centigrade. It was at least 2,700 because it needs that temperature and pressure to create nanodiamonds, which we've found scattered across North America and also Western Europe and as far as Syria from this explosion. That meteor is believed to have been made entirely of iron. Iron melts at 1,450 centigrade, so it's twice that temperature. It's quite possible that a lot of liquid iron was thrown up as ejector and then rained molten liquid iron across North America. That would incinerate everything. Vegetation, the forests, of course, megafauna. And also it would create a ferocious firestorm. So for the people who were there, their chance of survival was extremely limited. DNA does indicate that a few people survived. The only way they could survive was by hiding in a cave. But what would happen when the firestorm blew out and they emerged? They would see utter desolation, black soot, nothing else. What could they eat? There might be a little bit of roast meat around, but it would be rather overdone. If they knew where to dig for tuber, they might be able to get some vegetables to eat. But food scarcity would be a huge issue. And with all the ejecta thrown into the atmosphere, you're into a nuclear winter which lasted for years. We know of much more recent, much smaller impacts that meant the vegetation didn't grow for 2 years. So this scale could be 10 years at least. So you've got to survive 10 years with no vegetation. Quite a challenge. In addition, there's other problems. A lot of the tribal oral myths that were handed down amongst the Indian tribes in North America tell of this firestorm being followed by very large hailstorms, large hailstones that killed many of the survivors. In terms of climatology, it's entirely possible that the amount of moisture thrown into the atmosphere and the dramatic changes in temperature could lead to huge hailstones forming. There are also huge floods, particularly in the northern parts and the northwestern parts of the US. The impact would have liquefied and vaporized vast amounts of the Laurentian ice cap. There's evidence that there was huge outpourings of meltwater. Particularly, we can see the impact gouging through canyons being created in Washington State. An area called the Scablands, where large parts of the state have suffered from a massive flow of water, which uprooted and removed all the vegetation, all the soil, so that what the landscape now is just bedrock. Not only that, but it's littered with what are called erratics. these are rocks that are not native to the area they're sitting in. They typically were broken off of mountains hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away by glaciers, wrapped in snow, and then meltwater would have carried them. These have been carried an enormous distance, and we can tell that the volume of meltwater was incredible because of the size of some of these erratics, thousands of tons some of them weigh, and the positioning sometimes very high up on the valley sides. So estimates of the volume of water are that it overflowed river valleys. Some striation marks on valley sides indicated that the floodwaters could have been 150 meters deep in some valleys. That is a staggering amount of water, and obviously contributed to global average sea levels rising. So that's all for this episode, folks. The next episode, look out for it, we're going to start looking at the myth of Atlantis.